I was sipping my second cup of coffee, rubbing my chin and thinking about the hard task I had to do soon. My wife, Debbie, and I had just come back late last night from a road trip to Yellowstone Park with friends. When we finally parked the van, we were so tired that we could barely get out and go to bed. Debbie had to get up early for work on Monday morning, but I could sleep in for a little while longer. I didn't start my shift until 4 this afternoon. My name is Dave Dawson, and my wife is Debbie. We celebrated our first wedding anniversary last month. The trip was like a special gift for us. Debbie had worked long enough to have 5 days off, so with the weekends, we had 9 days to drive and enjoy the sights. We were also thinking about starting a family soon, and we knew we wouldn't have another big vacation for a long time. So, we decided to take this trip while everything seemed perfect. Our friends, John and Kathy Harrison, joined us on the trip. With all 4 of us, we could drive straight there and back, giving us a full week of camping in the park. John and Kathy brought along their 15-month-old baby boy. Luckily, Kathy's mom was free that week to stay at their place and take care of him. I went out to the driveway and opened the side doors of my 2-year-old Chevy van. The mess inside showed how much stuff 4 adults can gather after 9 days on the road. John and Kathy had gotten most of their things out when we dropped them off last night, but there was still a lot left. I sighed and started to sort through it all. Our suitcases were still on the floor, along with a box of food, a cooler, camping gear, and a pile of dirty clothes. I carried the suitcases back into the house. The dirty clothes went down the laundry chute, and I put the cooler's contents back in the refrigerator. I put the food back in the pantry and the camping and fishing gear back in the garage. Then I looked at the bed I had made in the van and decided to pull out the mattress to clean the floor. I got the vacuum and a trash can from the garage, opened the back doors, and grabbed the bedding to start pulling it out. The mattress was made to fit snugly, so it took some effort. Finally, it came loose all at once, and I fell backward as the mattress, bedding, and a bunch of other stuff spilled out. I got back up and sorted the bedding to wash it later. I took the trash can and began filling it with all the junk that had come out with the mattress. There were McDonald's wrappers, soda can tops, crumpled tissues, crushed foam coffee cups, and a wrapper. I stopped and stared at that last item, feeling confused. I sat down, feeling a bit lightheaded, thinking to myself, where did that come from? I ran my hand over the ripped wrapper on my knee. It read Trojan Ultra Thin. Something felt very off. I knew I hadn't seen it before we left for Yellowstone. I had cleaned the van really well, even taking out the mattress, vacuuming, and putting on fresh sheets before we packed up. As I absent-mindedly touched the wrapper, I wondered what it could mean. Debbie had stopped taking her birth control a month earlier. We had decided to start our family after she finished her first year at her job. John and Kathy openly shared that they waited until their little boy turned 2 before they planned to have another child. I thought, could it be a prank? John sometimes had a funny sense of humor, especially after a few drinks. I considered this for a while, then I grabbed the wastebasket and emptied it onto the driveway. I started going through the trash, looking closely until I found a crumpled-up tissue. I thought about it carefully as I slowly pulled it apart. When I opened the last layer, I found a dried-up used condom. No, this was not a joke. Feeling sick, I quickly sat down and put my head between my knees, trying not to throw up. The facts were clear. 1. Someone had been intimate in my van using a condom, likely to avoid getting pregnant. 2. That someone was not me. 3. The only woman on this trip who could get pregnant was Debbie. As I sat there, I thought about our trip. The only time John and Kathy had slept in the van was while we were driving. When we camped, they had set up a 2-person tent with an air mattress. They slept there, while Debbie and I had the van to ourselves when we were at the park. The 4 of us spent most of the week doing things together. We spent our days hiking, swimming, and exploring together, except for one afternoon. On about the 4th day in the park, I wanted to hike to a small lake around 5 miles from the road. It had a waterfall, and people said it had big fish. I thought it would be fun to take my fishing rod and some lures to see if I could catch anything. Kathy was excited to go, but Debbie said she was tired and didn't want to join us. John said he would stay with Debbie and run into town to pick up some groceries we needed. After an early lunch, Kathy and I set off on the trail. It took us more than 5 hours, but we finally got back to our campsite, tired but happy from our adventure. Debbie and John were busy making dinner on our small propane stove. They were sitting around and enjoying some drinks. It seemed they had been having a good time as there was a bag full of empty cans nearby. They were laughing and Debbie was giggling and seemed a bit tipsy. I noticed Kathy's unhappy face when she saw what was happening. John's drinking sometimes caused issues, and they often had arguments about it. That night, Debbie was in a loving mood when we went to bed. We hadn't done much during the trip because John and Kathy set their tent just a few feet away. The night was warm, so we left the van doors open, with only the mosquito net for protection. As soon as we got into bed, Debbie pulled my shorts down. She was eager and started kissing me right away. I tried to hold back a sound as she was really into it. I gently touched her as we enjoyed that special moment together. Eventually, I shifted and kissed her softly, trying to keep it calm. She wanted me to go further, but I knew if I did, she might make noise that could disturb the whole campsite. I placed my hand gently on her leg, feeling the warmth there. She was clearly excited and ready for more. I moved closer, and she let out a soft gasp as I began to touch her. I found a nice rhythm, and she wrapped her legs around me, encouraging me to go faster with her whispers. Soon, she moaned softly, and I had to cover her mouth to keep the sound down. She enjoyed herself a few more times, and I knew I couldn't hold back much longer. Afterward, as I tried to catch my breath, I thought about how quickly she had enjoyed herself. I guessed that waiting and a couple of drinks had made everything more intense for her. As we both drifted off to sleep, I didn't think about it too much. The next morning, John looked at me with a knowing smile, as if he had an idea of what had happened the night before. I suddenly realized that the look on his face was saying, "You have no idea what just happened," and the sick feeling in my stomach made me think I might actually believe it. I slowly got back on my feet and went back to cleaning the van, but first, I carefully put the wrapper and the crumpled-up item into a bag and hid it away in the garage. I wasn't sure why I did it. Maybe I didn't want to think about it later. I really didn't like what it made me think about. As I cleaned the inside of the van and then took out the hose to wash the outside, my mind went back 3 years to when Debbie and I first met. I had just turned 20, and it was the second semester of my second year at Northern Michigan University. I was studying electrical engineering. I was doing okay with my classes, but I was worried about money. I never got a scholarship, so I paid for the last 2 years of school with money I saved from working in high school and at car plants during the last 2 summers. But now, my money was running low. I knew I couldn't earn enough this summer for my junior year. The part-time jobs I had during the school year only gave me a little extra cash for myself. Mom and Dad couldn't help much either. We were a Catholic family, and I had 3 younger siblings at home. Our parents had made sure we all went to Catholic school until at least 9th grade. Because of this, they were still paying for the 2 youngest ones to go to school. My older sister was in her senior year at a public high school. I felt I had 2 options. I could start taking out student loans and finish school with a lot of debt, or I could take a break for 2 years to save enough money to complete my degree. I was starting to think that taking a break might be the best choice. The non-stop deadlines and exams had become really tiring. I was also fed up with sharing a small room with 3 other guys. No matter what you did, there always seemed to be at least one difficult roommate. I had already sent a letter to the job office at the factory where I had worked the previous summer to ask about getting a job. It was Friday night, and midterm exams had just finished. A few of us from the dorm decided to walk through a few feet of snow to a party off campus to celebrate. It was one of those typical fraternity parties with a big keg of beer. Guys paid $5 and girls could get in for free. The music was loud, and there would be dancing in some rooms and drinking games in others. By the end of the night, a few guys would likely find someone special upstairs. I dated every now and then while I was in college, but I hadn't had a steady girlfriend since high school. I wasn't a stranger to dating, but I had only been with a few girls. I lost my virginity on the night of my senior prom. My engineering studies were hard, and I often worked a part-time job. In the little free time I had, I played basketball or sometimes racquetball in the sports building. When we got to the house, my roommate, Josh, pointed to a group of people in a corner, and I nodded, saying I would get him a beer. I moved carefully through the crowds of people dancing and talking, trying not to spill the 2 plastic cups I had filled from the keg. Finally, I spotted Josh chatting with a couple of girls across the room. As I got closer, he reached out and took one cup from me. "Dave, I want you to meet Miranda," he said. "We have a class together, Econ 202, and this is her roommate, Debbie. This is Dave." I smiled at Miranda, a pretty brunette, and reached out my hand. "Hi, Miranda. Nice to meet you." Then I turned to her roommate and stopped. In front of me was one of the most stunning girls I had ever seen. She had long, reddish-blonde hair and bright green eyes that showed her Irish background. Her smile lit up the room, and her lips looked inviting. Even though she wore blue jeans, a hooded sweatshirt, and a winter scarf, it was clear she had a lovely figure. I finally came to my senses with Josh, Miranda, and Debbie all laughing at me. I felt my cheeks turn red and quickly said, "Sorry, I didn't mean to be rude." I couldn't help it. I looked right at Debbie and said, "But you are the most beautiful girl I have ever met." Now it was her turn to blush. "Well, thanks, Ken. A girl can't hear that enough." She laughed softly. Josh chimed in, "You know, you two live really close to each other back home. Debbie is from DeWitt." "No way, I'm from Okemos. Did you go to DeWitt High School?" "No, I went to Gabriel's Catholic High School," she replied. "Hey, I'm Catholic too, but my parents couldn't pay for that school," I said. We kept talking and slowly moved to a quieter corner. Gabriel's was the high school for several nearby parishes, including mine and Debbie's. A lot of my friends from my Catholic middle school went there. It turned out she knew some of them, and we both graduated the same year. We talked and talked, losing track of time, until Miranda finally came over and said, "Sorry to interrupt you two, but it's past midnight and it's snowing again. We should go back to the dorm." Debbie looked at me, and I sensed a bit of regret in her eyes as she said, "I guess I should go." Trying to stay calm, I said, "Wait, I'd really like to see you again." "Can I call you?" She smiled shyly. "Sure, I'm in East Shaw Hall. Debbie, I don't even know your last name. It's Königsknecht." "I know. It's a bit much," she said, looking a little embarrassed. I looked at her in surprise. "You're a K-13. The first Königsknechts came from Germany in the mid-1800s and settled in different towns in mid-Michigan. Over the years, their families grew so much that their kids filled many of the local schools. One frustrated teacher even gave them the nickname K-13 because there are 13 letters in their name, and that name stuck." Then she laughed. "Guilty, but my mom is fully Irish. You won't believe this, but I have an uncle who married a K-13 from near Standish," I said. "No way? Call me and we can chat more later," she said as Miranda held onto her arm, leading her toward the door. "I definitely will," I replied, watching them step out into the night. The next day, I called her back. I was so excited to talk to her that I couldn't wait. A day later, we met for pizza. It was still a school night, but we spent a few hours talking about school, friends from our hometowns, and our families. After high school, her parents wanted her to go to a college nearby, but she felt ready to be more independent. She applied to several colleges and chose the one that was farthest away from home. 400 miles felt far enough to have some freedom. Debbie was studying marketing and had worked at the same retail store for the last couple of summers. She was also going to be an intern in their business office during the upcoming break. She was in college with some help from a partial scholarship and student loans, so it was very important for her to keep her grades high. She had two sisters, one older and one younger. Her parents were still paying for her younger sister's high school, and her oldest sister was going to a state college near Detroit. Because of this, their money was tight, and they could only help her a little. She told me she was a junior varsity cheerleader in high school, but never tried out for the varsity team. She really loved swimming and worked as a lifeguard at a local country club for the last 2 summers of high school. It seemed her parents were quite strict with her and her sisters. She mentioned that she hadn't been allowed to date much in high school. Later, I learned from Miranda, through Josh, that she had started dating more since coming to college. Many guys wanted to take her out. She went on dates once or twice a week, but wasn't in a serious relationship. I was set on getting to know her better. I asked her out again, and from then on, we went out often. We always had a lot of fun. She had a wonderful personality and made me laugh. I could listen to her talk for hours. She enjoyed college parties, and we would have a couple of drinks and dance together. As the weather got warmer, I got to see her wear lighter clothes instead of boots and big sweatshirts. She looked amazing. The first time I saw her in a tank top and shorts, I started to feel unsure about myself. I thought, wow, Debbie looks like a model. Why is she interested in me? She was about 5'7", around 110 pounds, with a slim waist, nice curves, and long legs. Meanwhile, I was just a bit over 6 feet tall and weighed 190 pounds. I had brown hair and brown eyes with ordinary features that didn't stand out. I was in pretty good shape from working out regularly, but I was a bit stocky. My skin was somewhat dark, but I didn't really stand out among other people. We dated for about 6 weeks until the semester ended, but I knew she was also seeing other guys during that time. We had moved past just kissing after our second date. The last few times we met, we shared some passionate moments and a little affectionate touching. She seemed just as eager as I was to continue this, and I hoped that would make her stop dating other guys. But that didn't happen. On our last date before the semester finished, we talked about meeting up again when we got back home. We lived about 20 miles apart, and she said she would love to continue our relationship. Then, for the first time, I told her that I decided not to go back to school the next year. When she understood that I was serious, she paused and looked at me carefully. I thought she understood what I was thinking. But that night, instead of spending some time together, she told me she needed to study for her last exam. With that, our plans for the evening fell apart, and I took her back to her dorm. She gave me a quick kiss and a hug and hurried inside without saying anything about me calling her later. I walked back to my dorm, feeling confused about what had happened. After my last exam, I tried to call her before I left campus, but one of her roommates said she wasn't home. I figured her parents had come to pick her up and they were probably out somewhere. Moving back in with your family can be a big change. But we managed to adjust. The day after I got home, I went back to work at the plant. I was lucky to get a job in quality control during the day shift. At least for the first 90 days, I would stick to this schedule. After that, I might switch to one of the other shifts. I tried to call Debbie a few times in the evening at her parents' house, but they kept saying she was out. I left my number, but deep down, I felt like she had lost interest in me. This thought made me sad, and I worried that if I kept trying to reach her, things wouldn't turn out well. About a week later, I was surprised when my mom handed me the phone and said, "It's someone named Debbie." When I picked up, Debbie apologized for not being able to talk when I called before. She hoped I wasn't upset with her. I told her I wasn't. We chatted for a while about final exams and our new jobs. Then she said gently, "Dave, I was hoping you'd call to ask me out." "I wanted to," I replied, "but since I couldn't reach you the past couple of weeks, I thought you didn't want to hear from me." I felt a bit sad saying that. No, Dave. Please don't think that. I have to say I felt a bit strange when you told me you wouldn't be coming back to school. I wasn't sure what to think, but I really wanted to go out with you again," she said. That kicked off a wonderful summer. Since we both worked during the day, we could hang out a few times each week. I was pretty sure she wasn't seeing anyone else. Eventually, I met her family, and she met mine. Everyone got along well except my oldest sister. For some reason, she didn't seem to like Debbie much, but I didn't let it bother me. We enjoyed going to movies and having dinner together, and sometimes we would attend parties with her friends or my old friends from high school. A few times, we visited the beach at Lake Michigan when we had a day off. Seeing Debbie at the beach always made me smile. We played around in the lake, and she would laugh at me when I got flustered in my swim shorts and couldn't just walk out of the water. We were back to kissing and exploring our feelings for each other a little more every time we met. By the end of July, I realized I couldn't stay at home for the 2 years it would take to save money for school. I was earning a good salary and thought I could manage a small apartment. But the main reason was that I wanted to spend time alone with Debbie. I felt we both knew where our relationship was heading. Mom and Dad took the news well. They helped me find some nice used furniture from friends and family. I moved in just a few weeks before Debbie had to go back to school. That first weekend, we went out for dinner and came back to my apartment, both of us excited about what was to come. When we got inside, I held her in my arms and gave her a long, soft kiss, our lips gently touching. Debbie pulled away and took my hand, guiding me into the bedroom. We stood close in the dim light, slowly taking off each other's clothes. Once we were both dressed in just our skin, we hugged and kissed once more. I felt excited as we embraced. She pulled back for a moment and held me gently. "Debbie, should I use protection?" I asked softly. She looked into my eyes and replied, "I'm not new to this, Dave. I started the pill last month. Is that all right?" I wasn't surprised and nodded. I gently touched her shoulders and sides. Together, we fell onto the bed. As we did, her legs moved up and I felt a warm connection between us. We both understood that there would be time for soft moments later, but right now, this was what we needed. The evening stretched on with laughter and fun as we tried to understand what made each other happy. We discovered a lot of things we both enjoyed. For the next 3 weeks, Debbie visited me every few days. One night she told her parents she was staying over with a friend, and she spent the night with me. It was a special time. Those long evenings let us learn about more than just ourselves. I wanted to know everything about her. We spent hours talking. She shared how much she loved college, the classes she took, the friends she made, and everything about the experience. But she also felt stressed about being at home because her parents still wanted to control her social life. As her time to return to school got closer, I felt sadder. On our last night together, we had a deep talk after sharing a quiet moment. I said, "Debbie, I know we have avoided this conversation, but with you leaving tomorrow, I think we need to talk about it. I think I really care about you. I don't want to stop seeing you." Debbie looked down and bit her lip. "I really like you, Dave. Maybe it's love, I'm not sure. But we've only been dating for a few months. I don't want to stop seeing you either. But we will be 400 miles apart during most of the school year and we will both be busy." I tried to keep my voice steady as I asked, "Can we try to meet a few times before Christmas break?" "Sure, Dave, we can try," she replied, though she didn't sound very sure. "Debbie, I want you to know that you are the only girl for me. I want to give you something before you go." I reached into the nightstand and took out a small jewelry box, opening it in front of her. Inside was a pretty ring made of white gold with an amethyst stone and a small diamond on each side. Amethyst was her birthstone. Debbie's eyes widened and her hands covered her mouth. "Oh, Dave, it's beautiful. Debbie, I'd love for you to wear it. And when you see it, think of me, okay?" She slipped it onto her finger and, with tears in her eyes, hugged me tightly. "I promise I will, Dave." After that night, we only talked on the phone once before she left for school. I had wanted to drive Debbie, but her dad bought her a used car so she could get around at school. I felt sad about our last conversation and how she didn't seem excited about what I wanted to say. I wanted her to be my girlfriend. I wanted us to be special to each other. If we were still in high school, I would have asked her to be my girl. Instead, I worried she was trying to let me down gently. With Debbie gone, I mostly worked. A few times a week, I met some friends at the YMCA to play basketball. Almost every weekend, I spent time with my mom and dad, who made sure I ate well. I called Debbie's dorm a couple of times a week. About half the time, she was there. I also wrote her letters a couple of times a week. We talked and wrote about meeting up, but it never worked out. Soon, our calls and letters became less frequent. A few weeks after Debbie left, I was asked if I wanted to take a test for the electrician's apprenticeship program at work. It could take 2 to 4 years to finish, depending on how many hours I worked each month, but I would get some credit for my 2 years in college. The program paid about 20% more than what I was earning now. The company would also cover the costs of college-level classes. Even if I decided to leave before finishing, I would still be ahead in terms of pay. I took the test and passed it easily. I began the program soon after. I enjoyed the apprenticeship program a lot. I've always liked gadgets, stereo systems, and almost anything electronic. That was why I chose to study electrical engineering in the first place. I was also good with tools. I had the chance to work a lot of extra hours, almost as much as I wanted. As I learned more, skilled electricians started asking me to help them with side jobs, and we usually got paid in cash. With all the extra money, I could buy a lot of fun things, but I still wanted to finish school. I didn't go on dates, even though I had chances. I was in love with Debbie, and that was my other big dream, so I saved most of my money or put it into some small investments. A few weeks before Thanksgiving, during one of our rare phone calls, Debbie told me she would be home Wednesday night before the holiday and wouldn't leave until Sunday afternoon. She hoped to spend most of that time with me. For the first time since she left, I felt really excited about seeing her again. We arranged to meet at her house after Thanksgiving dinner. Seeing her again felt like a joyful rush. I felt really shy, but I couldn't stop looking at her. Her mom and dad were happy to see me, and her two sisters greeted me warmly. Her dad and I had clicked right away when we found out that the K-13 my uncle married was actually a distant relative of his. We both seemed a bit unhappy that Debbie hadn't been home since she started school. I spent some time there enjoying dessert and watching football. Then, I suggested that Debbie and I go out to see a movie. She was excited about it, and we quickly left, not really noticing that her mom and dad looked a bit sad. We drove straight to my apartment. Once we got inside, we lost track of everything else around us. We fell onto the bed and easily found our rhythm together. It felt as if she had never left. We talked and shared close moments filled with joy and laughter again and again. I pushed aside my sadness about being apart for a long time, and Debbie didn't bring it up. When it was time for Debbie to leave again, we both knew Christmas break was only a few weeks away. This time, I kissed her goodbye and felt more positive about our time apart and our relationship. 3 weeks later felt just like Thanksgiving again. It was as if we had never been away from each other. I had 2 weeks off from work because of the holiday shutdown at the auto plant, so we had plenty of time to be together. We went to Christmas parties and shopped for gifts. Debbie spent time with my family, and I spent time with hers. I helped her dad with some electrical work in the basement entertainment room he was finishing, and we became good friends. For Christmas, I gave her matching amethyst earrings and a necklace that went with her ring. She gave me 2 nice cable-knit sweaters that I thought looked great on me. We spent more and more time at my apartment, and a few times she stayed over for the night. I didn't know what she was saying to her parents, and I didn't ask. Even then, I felt I would be happy spending my life with her like this. The day before she had to go back to school, we talked again about being apart and meeting every month. Once more, she was vague and didn't promise anything. What bothered me more was that I told her several times I thought I was in love with her. Each time she would smile, hug me, or give me a quick kiss, but she never said she felt the same. I mentioned this the last day we were together. Holding her close, I said, "Debbie, I know it's hard for you to talk about feelings. I care about you a lot, and I want to have a future with you. But it feels like you don't feel the same way." With tears in her eyes, she looked at me. "Please, Dave, I love being with you and having fun together. Can't we just enjoy our time together when we can?" "I am happy when I'm with you, Debbie. I just want to see you more. I want you to know that you're the only one for me. I hope you feel the same way." For the first time, Debbie looked away and wouldn't meet my eyes. "Dave, we've been apart for a long time. I can't expect you to just sit at home and not live your life. Debbie, I don't want to see anyone else. No one can take the place of what we have. I really hope you feel the same." Debbie gave me a hug and a kiss, and we forgot what we were talking about for a bit. But later, when I thought about it, I realized she never answered my question. I knew she wasn't as serious about our relationship as I was. When I thought about that, it made me feel sad. So I kept myself busy. I took all the extra work I could, did a couple of side jobs each week, attended my college classes, and spent a few mornings at the YMCA. A few weeks after the holiday break, one of the other electricians started talking about a house he was trying to sell. His father had died the year before, and this house was part of what he left behind. The house was old and a bit broken down, but it was in a nice area with good schools. His family just wanted to sell it quickly, so they offered it for a low price. They were even willing to set up a special contract for 5 years to help someone buy it. I decided to check it out because the payments would be just a bit more than my rent. The house was big, with more than 2,000 square feet. It had 4 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, and it stood on a large corner lot. The only thing I didn't like was that the garage was separate from the house and quite a distance away. The house needed a lot of repairs. The parents had lived there for 40 years and hadn't changed much. But I thought that if I could fix everything before the 5-year contract was up, it would be worth 3 to 4 times what I paid for it. Getting a mortgage for the house would be easy. I made an offer, and after a little back and forth, we struck a deal. Within a few weeks, I moved out of my apartment and into my new home. I didn't tell Debbie until it was done because I wanted to surprise her, but I was surprised myself when she didn't seem to care. I kept trying to get Debbie to come visit. Finally, I said if she couldn't come down, I would come up there. She suggested we meet halfway instead. So we picked a date a couple of weeks later, and I arranged to take a few days off work. As the day came closer, the weather in the UP got worse, with one snowstorm after another. A couple of days before we were set to meet, she called to say her car was having problems. With the bad weather, she wanted to delay the trip. I was really disappointed, but I agreed. After we hung up, I felt pretty down about it. It seemed like the best time for us to meet again would be during spring break. In the meantime, I spent my free time fixing up the house. I asked a carpenter at work who also did home building on the side to help me plan how I wanted my house to look when it was done. I had big ideas, but I really wanted it to be a place that Debbie would enjoy living in one day. I made a list of what to work on first. I decided to focus on the kitchen first, then the bathrooms, and lastly the other rooms. When the weather got better, I would start on the outside projects. I knew that remodeling the house would be expensive because of the materials. However, the cost of labor would be low. Most of the workers at the plant helped each other out, so that's what I decided to do. I did electrical jobs and general work for the guys who needed help, and in return, the carpenters, glass workers, painters, and heating and cooling experts helped me with my projects. A few weeks before spring break, I got a call from Debbie's dad, Carl. I had kept in touch with him and Debbie's mom, Angela. I even visited them a couple of times since Christmas. Both Carl and Angela understood my feelings for Debbie. They also shared my frustration about trying to keep a long-distance relationship with her. When I answered Carl's call, he asked, "What do you think about Debbie's plans for spring break?" I felt confused and replied, "What do you mean?" "You don't know?" he asked. "I haven't talked to her in a week, but I thought she was coming home," I said. "She called last night. She plans to go to Corpus Christi with some girlfriends," he said, clearly upset. "I asked her what you thought when she told you, but she didn't answer me." "I can't believe she hasn't told you about it." "No, she never mentioned anything. I really don't understand what's going on with her. I asked if she would stop by here on her way to Texas, and she said no. Her friend Miranda lives in Milwaukee, and they are getting a ride there to pick up a car. They plan to drive down through Wisconsin and keep going south. They want to come back the same way." As I thought about what he said, I felt angry at Debbie for the first time. Did she really care so little that she wouldn't even talk to me about this? She knew how excited I was to spend time with her during the break. I had told her how much I wanted her to see the house. I wanted her thoughts on how to decorate it. I had even asked for a few days off to enjoy a long weekend together while she was home. Feeling hurt, I said, "I guess she's made her choice, Carl. Seems like our relationship isn't important enough for her to talk to me first." "I'm really sorry, Dave. You don't deserve this," he replied. We chatted for a little longer before ending the call. As I sat in the half-finished kitchen of what I hoped would be our future home, I realized that wishing for something didn't make it come true. I understood now that our relationship was mostly one-sided. My dreams didn't match hers. There was nothing I could do to make her love me the way I loved her. I shook my head and wiped my tears. It felt like I had lost someone very close. When that happens, you feel a deep emptiness. You will always love them, but you know it's time to accept it and move forward. The next day, when I got home from class, I found a message from Debbie on the answering machine. "Dave, sorry I missed you. Can you call me as soon as you get this? I really want to talk to you. Thanks, sweetie." Her voice sounded cheerful. I guess she wanted to make me feel better about not coming home for spring break. I shook my head, deleted the message, and headed to work. The next day, I was busy with a side job until it was almost time for my shift. As I walked into the kitchen, I noticed another message on the recorder. It was from Debbie again, but this time her tone wasn't so happy. "Dave, please call me. I talked to Dad last night, and he mentioned he told you about my new plans for spring break. Please call me, okay? I can explain. I'll be in the dorm all afternoon." I could hear a hint of worry in her voice this time. Her dad probably got upset with her for not talking to me first. Again, I deleted the message and went on with my day. A couple of days later, Mom called and asked me what was going on with Debbie. I asked her what she meant. She said Debbie called asking for my new address. She seemed unsure when she asked why she hadn't heard from me. Carefully, I replied, "Debbie and I are no longer together." Mom gasped. "Dave, why? What happened?" "We just didn't agree on what was important to us," I said softly. "I'm sorry, sweetie. I know that must be tough. Why don't you come for dinner this Sunday? We can celebrate your birthday, okay? Actually, my birthday was on Saturday. But since I was finally old enough to go to bars, some guys from work wanted to take me out. So I told her I would come over on Sunday instead. So my 21st birthday came and went. The guys took me out and I had a bit too much to drink. I danced a little with some women and turned down a few offers to do more. I didn't hear from Debbie, but I didn't expect to. I wasn't sure if she even remembered when my birthday was, even though we had talked about it a couple of months before hers. The next day, I had dinner with my family. Both my brothers and my sister were there. Angie, my sister, was now a freshman at a state university about 30 miles away. Mom made my favorite meals and everyone gave me gifts. It was a wonderful time. After dinner, Angie pulled me aside and asked what had happened with Debbie. Angie and I were the closest in age, so we had always been close. I told her everything that had happened over the past year, all the struggles of trying to keep our relationship going, and how I felt frustrated when Debbie decided to leave for spring break without telling me. Dave, I know you might have wondered why I never liked Debbie much when you started dating her, she said. I never mentioned it, but I know Debbie's younger sister, Sarah. Not very well, but enough to have talked to her. We were both in the same multi-parish Catholic youth group our senior year. After you both started dating, I talked with her during one of our meetings. I mentioned that I knew someone who was dating her sister. I didn't tell her it was my brother. She had a lot to say about Debbie. It sounded like she didn't like her much. She said Debbie was selfish and cared only about herself. With her looks, she always got what she wanted. She said even in high school, Debbie had at least 2 boyfriends who always wanted to be around her, and she was always looking for more. No matter how much their parents tried to keep her busy at home, she still found ways to go out. I thought about what she had shared. Then I shrugged and said sadly, I don't know, Angie. I didn't see that side of her. All I know is that I loved her, and I think I still do. But I just can't live like that. If she doesn't feel the same way I feel about her, then I guess it's best for both of us to go our separate ways. Angie gave me a hug, and we didn't say anything else. The next weekend, Debbie's dad, Carl, came over to visit. I showed him around the house and the yard, pointing out the different projects I was working on. He was really impressed. You said you bought this house for how much? He asked. When I told him, he exclaimed, Wow! If you finish everything, this place could be worth 3 or 4 times that. He shook his head in disbelief. I can't believe you just turned 21. This is a great investment for someone much older. He looked at me carefully. Dave, I want you to know that I would have been proud to have you as a son-in-law. I've never met anyone who works as hard as you do for what you want. Feeling a bit awkward, I replied, Thanks, Carl, but we never reached that stage in our relationship. Carl stared at me directly. Maybe not you, Dave, but we could see how much you cared about Debbie. I knew where she went when she said she was at a friend's house. Don't be awkward about it. We always felt she was safe with you. I just wish things had turned out better. I simply shrugged and shifted the topic. As he walked out the door, he added, Not that it matters now, but she called to say she arrived in Corpus Christi safely. Then he left. For the next few months, my routine didn't change much. I worked at the plant, fixed things around the house, and took on a few small jobs. I spent a couple of hours in class on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I played basketball at the YMCA on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings. The only difference was that as it got warmer, I started working on outdoor projects. I was happy with how the house was coming along. I noticed that the harder I worked, the better I slept at night. If I lay awake, my mind drifted to thoughts of Debbie and how much I missed her. And when I missed her, I couldn't sleep. It was a hard cycle I wanted to avoid. I got one more phone message from her after she came back from Texas. I deleted it right after I heard her voice. About a month after spring break, it was Debbie's birthday. I thought about it a lot, but in the end, I sent her a card. It was simple, and I just signed my name. I wanted her to know that I remembered. Then it was back to my usual routine. On Saturday of Memorial Day weekend, around noon, I heard someone knocking on the front door. The factory was closed for all 3 days, and I wanted to finish a big project in the backyard. I had been working since before 9 that morning. When I opened the door, I said a bit sharply, Yes, but everything else I might have said got stuck in my throat. There stood Debbie. She looked as lovely as ever and took my breath away. Her eyes were wide, showing her surprise. I pressed the doorbell, but no one answered. She almost stumbled over her words as she spoke. Dave, what happened to you? She blurted out. Huh? I said, confused. I looked down at myself, thinking, what does she mean? I stood there in torn khaki shorts, work boots, and no shirt. A tool belt was hanging low on my hips. I was sweaty and had a light covering of sawdust from the circular saw I had been using all morning. Then it hit me. Debbie hadn't seen me in 6 months. I guessed I had lost 10 or 15 pounds since then. I had been working really hard ever since I bought my house in January. And when she left for spring break, I worked even harder. I rarely took the time to enjoy a real meal anymore, and food didn't interest me much. The extra weight I used to have had pretty much vanished. I could tell that my clothes were fitting differently. I had lost some inches around my waist, but gained some on my chest and shoulders. I hadn't been shaving much lately, maybe every couple of days, so I could feel the stubble on my face. I also got my hair cut shorter when the weather got warm. Now that I thought about it, I probably looked a bit rough around the edges. I opened the door wider and said, "Come on in. Let me turn off the radio." I stepped away from the door into the dining room and switched off the music. When I walked back, I noticed Debbie standing just inside the house. She seemed a bit uneasy as I looked at her closely. She was wearing white shorts, sandals, and a snug pastel tank top. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and her sunglasses were resting on her head. I saw she was wearing the amethyst ring I had given her. She looked nice. Just seeing her made me feel better. "I'm sorry. I had the radio playing while I was busy in the back, so I didn't hear the doorbell. I guess I looked a bit tired. I wasn't ready for visitors," I said with a small smile. "No, you look fine, Dave. Just a little different. I wanted to check on you. Dad told me he came by before and really liked the house. It seems big," she said, finally looking around the living room. "Would you like to see the rest of it?" I asked, smiling. "You wouldn't mind?" she replied, sounding a bit shy. "Not at all. I'm happy with how it's turning out," I said as she began to follow me. The house is almost 2,000 square feet. It used to have 4 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. I'm changing it to have 3 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms. There will be 2 full baths upstairs and 1 downstairs. In the living room, we are working on the fireplace, using stones from the field. That oak beam leaning against the wall will be the shelf above it. The floors downstairs are all made of original hardwood. Once we finish everything else, I plan to refinish the floor. We walked into the dining area, and I pointed to the plans on the kitchen table. I had a builder friend draw up the design for how I wanted things done. I think it will take more than a year to finish. I took her into the kitchen, which is the only room I have completely finished. It has new appliances, marble countertops, and brand new cabinets. The kitchen is the only room that is 100% done so far, even the paint, I said. "It's beautiful," she said, touching the marble. "Let's go upstairs before we check out the outside," I suggested. We climbed the stairs and walked down the hallway. The master bedroom looks out over the backyard and has its own bathroom. I've replaced the stool, sink, vanity, and tub already. The floor still needs to be put in, and the walls need paint, I said, as I guided her past my queen-size bed, which had an old quilt on it. I turned to see her looking at the bedside table. Next to the phone and lamp was a small picture of her. It was one she had given me for Christmas. Finally, she looked away and focused on the bathroom. "Wow, a jacuzzi tub!" she exclaimed. "Yes," I replied, choosing not to mention that it was big enough for 2 people. Next, I led her across the hall. The end bedroom was so small that I decided to change it. Part of it will join with the closet in the master bedroom to create a big walk-in closet. The other part will be made into a full bathroom. I showed her the other 2 bedrooms. One was completely empty, and the other was set up as my study. In the room, there was a hide-a-bed, a desk, a couple of chairs, 2 big bookshelves, and a small TV. We moved back and stood at the top of the stairs. We looked across a tall space with wooden beams that showed just how big the house was. Debbie touched my arm and said, "Dave, this house is huge. What are you going to do with all this room?" I looked at her and replied slowly, "Well, when I bought it, I didn't imagine living here by myself." When she understood what I meant, Debbie's face turned red, and she took her hand away. To ease the tension, I said, "Come on, let me show you the back of the house and the garage." I walked her down the stairs, through the dining area and out the sliding glass doors onto the partly finished deck. This is what I'm working on this week. The deck is about 220 square feet in 2 levels with steps that lead down to the yard. It will be big enough for a gas grill, an outdoor table, some chairs, and even a hot tub. I'm also planning to put up a privacy fence to close off about 2,000 square feet of the yard. That's enough space to add a swimming pool in the future. I walked her over to the garage, which is about 50 feet from the house. I know it's just a garage, but it can fit 2.5 cars. It also has a big attic for storage. I want to build a room on the side that faces the house and turn that space into a workshop. Besides that, there's the basement, which has enough room for a nice recreation area. Debbie looked around at the garage, the house, and the yard slowly. Well, Dave, it's clear that you are proud of what you're doing here, and I can see why. But how can you afford all this? I scratched my neck and smiled. Well, I don't pay for much labor. I do most of the work myself, or I trade work with some people in construction. Plus, I get discounts on materials from suppliers. Honestly, I don't have much to spend money on except this house. I understand, she replied, deep in thought. We talked as we walked down the driveway to her car. Dave, thank you for the birthday card. It was really nice of you to remember, she said softly. I just smiled and nodded. She opened her car door, but then turned to face me. Dave, Mom and Dad wanted me to ask if you would come over for dinner on Monday. Dad is going to grill food. It will just be family and my sister's boyfriends, probably. I put my hands in my pockets and looked at the ground as I thought about it. Finally, I looked up and asked, Do you think it would be too strange for you to have me there? No, Dave. It would really mean a lot to me if you came. Please? She looked right into my eyes. Okay, I'll come. What time? With a big smile, she said, About 2, and can you bring some drinks, please? I smiled back at her and replied, Sure. I watched her drive away from the house. As I turned to go back inside, I noticed I was smiling. I had been smiling almost the whole time she was here. On Memorial Day, I got ready and even shaved. I put on some nice shorts, a polo shirt, and sandals, then grabbed a case of beer from the fridge and went over to Debbie's house. She greeted me warmly at the door and surprised me by giving me a quick kiss on the cheek. She took my hand and led me through the house to the back patio. Her mom and dad welcomed me like I was their own son. I had met her sisters last Christmas. Now she introduced me to her older sister's fiancé and her younger sister's boyfriend. Debbie's older sister, Elizabeth, looked like a pretty version of her dad. She had just finished college with a degree in finance. She and her fiancé were planning to get married in the fall. Her younger sister, Sarah, was becoming a more serious version of Debbie. To be honest, she was really smart, just as pretty, but in a different way. She had just finished high school and was starting at a college nearby. She was great with numbers. She hadn't made up her mind yet about whether to study accounting or engineering. We had a wonderful time together. Her dad and I talked a lot about my house, while her mom joined in with comments now and then. They both seemed very interested in how everything was coming along. Debbie didn't say much, but her sisters listened closely and added suggestions from time to time. Sarah and Debbie were helping with the food, and sometimes I caught them looking at me and whispering. After dinner, we all sat around enjoying a drink and chatting. I noticed that no one talked about spring break or Texas. I did ask Debbie if she had seen Josh at all this school year. We hadn't spoken for a while, and I was curious about how he was doing. She said she had only seen him once this semester, but Miranda saw him now and then and had even gone out with him a few times. As it got later, I said it was time for me to go home. I thanked Carl and Angela for dinner, said goodbye to everyone else, and headed for the door. Debbie got up, walked over to her mom, and whispered something. Then she said, I'll walk you to your car. She took my hand, and we walked to my car together. When we stopped, she looked at me and said, Dave, can we talk for a few minutes? There's a small park just down the block. It has some picnic tables, and no one will bother us. I guessed this talk might happen after being invited to dinner, so I just nodded. We kept walking and talked about small things until we reached the park. We sat down across from each other. We both stopped talking as Debbie fidgeted. She finally took a deep breath, clasped her hands tightly together, and looked at me. Dave, I want to say I'm sorry for what I did over spring break. I know it was wrong. I should have talked to you, but I didn't want any arguments. After you stopped answering my calls, I thought writing to you would help, but I didn't know what to say. When I got the chance to go, all I could think about was that I only have 2 years left in college. This could be my last chance. I know it was selfish. I didn't think about how you would feel. I knew you wouldn't be happy with me, but I didn't think you would shut me out. She looked at me, tears in her eyes. I understand, I replied. You made a choice about what mattered to you. I felt hurt and let down, but I also learned where I fit in. I shrugged. But that's all in the past now, and so are we. We can both move forward. She began to cry, saying, But Dave, I don't want to end things with you. Please, I miss you and want to be with you. End things? Debbie, we were never really together. Whenever I tried to get closer, you kept me at a distance. You showed me that you cared more about being on your own than being with me. If you don't feel the same way I do, then I guess I need to accept that and move on. She looked down at her hands. I know, Dave, I was scared. I was scared of making promises. I felt like you were pushing me. The last few months without you have taught me a lot. I realized that I do love you. I hope you still love me too. I reached across the table and held her hands gently. Debbie, I never stopped loving you. I just found it hard to keep going without feeling the same love in return. Debbie looked at me with tears in her eyes. Can we try again, Dave? I thought about this for a few minutes. I realized it was what I wanted most. I'm working nights and you're working days. It will be hard to meet up, I said. That doesn't matter, Dave. I'm okay with anything you want to do, Debbie replied, holding onto my hands. I think I can skip working late on Saturday night. Let's plan something for Saturday or Saturday night, all right? That would be wonderful, Dave, she said, smiling as she wiped her tears away. This was the start of us getting back together. The first couple of weeks were slow, but soon we were close again. During the week, I focused on my job and working on house projects, but on weekends we were together. I tried to say no to extra work on weekends so I could spend more time with her, and being together felt amazing. Everything they say about working things out after a break is true. Our time together was even better than before. Debbie began spending weekends at my place. I wasn't sure what her mom and dad thought about it, but I could tell they were happy we were together again. I asked Debbie to help me choose the paint, carpet, and curtains for the house. She also had a great sense for the garden. A few times a week while I was at work, she'd come over to work on the projects with me. Sometimes I would come home and find her sleeping in my bed. Of course, those mornings she would call in sick to her job. Summer was passing quickly. The car I had driven for many years was starting to break down, so I traded it for a nearly new van. A few weekends towards the end of summer, Debbie and I would pack it up and go camping by Lake Michigan. The last weekend before Debbie had to go back to school, we both took Friday off and went to Wilderness State Park for 3 days. On Saturday, we were relaxing on the beach, enjoying the warm sun after a cool swim in Lake Michigan. As we lay there, I gently touched her face and neck and kissed her ear. She turned to me and smiled. Wow, Dave, didn't you get enough fun last night? I never get enough time with you, Debbie, I replied. She turned towards me, and we lay face to face, sharing soft kisses. Debbie, will you marry me? I asked. What did you say? She looked surprised and pulled back a little. I sat up and took a small box from our beach bag. I opened it and held it out to her. I think you heard me, Debbie. Will you marry me? She sat up and stared at the beautiful ring inside the box. Wow, Dave, it's lovely. I took the ring out and placed it on her finger. Is that a yes? Yes, it's a yes, Dave. I love you, I really do. For the rest of the trip, we talked about getting married. We both thought it was smart to wait until Debbie finished school, so we decided on a date for the following summer, probably late July or August. We both wanted kids someday, but thought it was better to wait until Debbie had a steady job. I took a night off before Debbie had to go back to school. Debbie, our parents, and I went out for a nice dinner to celebrate our engagement. The 3 women made plans to meet over Christmas to talk about the wedding. Debbie and I agreed that we would have a date set by then. That night, Debbie stayed over, and we talked softly until morning. We made a clear plan to meet at least once a month during the school year. I offered to drive to see her, but she said she would rather drive down, or we could meet halfway between school and home. For her last year of school, Debbie was going to live off campus. A couple of her friends, including Miranda, asked if she wanted to share a house with them. Her part of the cost would not be much more than what she would pay for a dorm room. She told me she was tired of living on campus. Since she had a car, getting to class wouldn't be a problem. The next day, I kissed her goodbye and watched as she got into her packed car and drove north. She had barely reached the end of the street when I started to miss her. I fell back into my routine from the last year. Now, I had a goal of finishing the house in time for our wedding. On weekends, I tried to relax a bit more and spend time with family. Most Sundays, I had invitations for dinner at my parents' house or at Debbie's parents' house. To be fair, I took turns going to each place every other weekend. Debbie's younger sister, Sarah, traveled from home to college, so she was usually there for dinner too. When she was, we always had great talks and a lot of fun. Debbie came home for her older sister's wedding at the end of September. Just like you would expect, she and Sarah were bridesmaids. The wedding went well, and everyone had a wonderful time. Debbie and I danced, enjoyed some drinks, and shared lots of laughs during the reception. When October came, Debbie and I planned to meet up at the end of the month. A few days before our meetup, she called to say there was an early snowstorm and her car was having brake problems. She didn't think she could come down. I offered to drive up and stay with her, but she said she would rather push our get-together to the next weekend. She planned to get the car checked, and she hoped the weather would get better. I changed our motel reservations in Mackinac City. We met the next Friday and spent a nice weekend exploring, including a whole day on Mackinac Island. When she first arrived, she seemed a bit distracted. When I asked her what was wrong, she just said she was thinking about schoolwork and tests. At dinner that first night, I was holding her hands when I noticed something missing. I asked, "Debbie, where is your engagement ring?" Debbie looked at her hand, surprised that she didn't have it on. She turned red and said, "Oh, I took it off while doing the dishes before I left. I just forgot to put it back on." I then pointed to her other hand where her amethyst ring sparkled. "I guess I'm a bit forgetful. I must have taken one and forgot the other," she said, not sounding very sure of herself. "Well, next time, remember the special one and forget the rest," I joked, and we moved on from it. Thanksgiving break came, and we had a great 4-day weekend. Debbie spent most of that time at my house. I showed her how things were going with my home projects, and we shared ideas about some decorating. I added her suggestions to my list of things to do. We also did some shopping for lights and carpets. When Debbie came home for Christmas, she mentioned that her car was still having issues. With all the snow this year, she was unsure how many times she could make the trip back in winter. I knew that even in good weather, the drive was a tiring 6 hours. Her dad and I took a look at her car and decided it wasn't worth spending a lot of money to fix it. In the end, I bought a 2-year-old Jeep that still had a warranty. I had a mechanic check it out and tell me it was in good shape. I gave the car to Debbie, saying there was no reason now for her not to get home. I tried to be funny, but she didn't laugh. Debbie and the moms finished the wedding plans. They picked a date, booked the church, and found a place for the reception. They took care of many details, and I was happy that all I had to do was wear a tux and be there. I drove to meet Debbie in St. Ignace for Valentine's Day weekend. It was too snowy and cold for many activities, but we enjoyed the pretty view of the coastline and the bridge. I had booked a room with a hot tub at the hotel, and we were very happy to spend most of our time relaxing there, catching up after 6 weeks apart. Debbie planned to come home for spring break, but then work surprised me with some changes. I was asked to go to Van Nuys, California, to learn how to set up some new machines coming to our factory for the new model year. The training would take about 2 weeks, and it fell during spring break. I tried to avoid it, but I was told there wasn't much I could do. Debbie was as upset as I was when I shared the news. We both knew we wouldn't see each other again for a few weeks. A few days later, she called me. She asked if it was okay for her to go to Florida with her roommates since I wouldn't be home for spring break. We talked about it, and I made it clear I didn't really like the idea. I thought it wasn't right for someone who was engaged to do that. I would feel better if she stayed home. Plus, I wondered how she could pay for the trip. She told me, a bit sharply, that she could manage on her own and that I shouldn't worry about her. Her roommates said they would help pay most of the bills if she agreed to drive the Jeep. The whole talk made me feel uneasy. It felt like the call was just a way for her to check a box, and that she had already decided what to do. It reminded me of the previous year when she ignored me as long as she got what she wanted. I tried to forget it and focused on getting ready for the trip to California. It was a long and tough journey. We worked 10 to 12 hours each day and only had one day off for sightseeing. I couldn't keep in touch with Debbie, but she stayed in touch with her parents, and I kept in contact with them. By the time I got back home, Debbie was already back at school. I called her early the next morning, eager to talk to her, but a man answered the phone. Unsure if I had dialed the right number, I asked, "Who is this?" "Tom. Who are you looking for?" he replied. "Debbie Königsknecht. Is this her number?" "Sure, give me a moment." I heard him call out Debbie's name. In the background, I heard her ask, "What?" The man replied, "It's a phone call." I thought I caught Debbie whispering, "You know you're not supposed to answer the phone. Who is it?" The man answered, "I don't know, some guy." Debbie picked up the phone and said, "Hello." "It's me, Debbie," I said softly. "Hi, sweetie, you're calling very early. How was California?" she asked quickly. I didn't see much of it except for inside the factory. "Who answered the phone?" I asked. "Oh, that was Tom, Miranda's boyfriend." "On a weekday? This early in the morning?" I questioned. "Well, he sometimes stays over at Miranda's. You know how it goes, Dave," she said a bit defensively. "Yeah, I know, Debbie. But I don't like the idea of guys sleeping over at my fiancé's place," I said, feeling upset. "Now, Dave, you don't have to worry about it. They have been together for quite some time." "Are we meeting up soon? I missed you during break," she said. I let her pull me in, and we talked about getting together in Harbor Springs in a few weeks. I asked her how Florida was, and she just said they had fun and the weather was nice. Even though I felt uneasy about it, I pushed those thoughts away with all the excitement of graduation and wedding plans. Harbor Springs would be the last time we would meet before school ended. Debbie was doing well in all her classes and would graduate on time. That was a great achievement. The store where she had interned for the last couple of summers offered her a full-time job in management, and she said yes. Debbie's parents and I had already spoken about coming to the ceremony. When I told Debbie this, she tried to act like it wasn't a big deal to be there. The ceremony would last only an hour, and she wanted to leave right after, but I promised her I wouldn't miss it. As graduation got closer, Carl, Angela, and I decided to travel together. The event was set for Thursday morning at 11. We were sad when Debbie told us she would be at a party the night before for the graduating seniors. The next morning, she and her roommates would be busy getting the house ready for the landlord and heading straight to the auditorium. So even though we planned to drive there the night before, we wouldn't see her until after the ceremony. Most graduation events are pretty similar. You listen to speakers from the school, hear some students talk about their experiences, and then the special guest gives a speech. After that, they call the seniors up to receive their diplomas. Then all the graduates tossed their hats in the air and the ceremony was over. We walked out of the auditorium to where the graduates were gathered, congratulating one another and receiving cheers from their families. They were taking pictures in their gowns and showing relief or excitement that they had finally completed their studies. We soon spotted Debbie in a group of graduates posing for photos. When she saw us, she quickly left the group, ran over, and gave us all hugs. She happily showed us her diploma, and we took turns taking photos with her in her gown. Her dad mentioned something about meeting her friends. Debbie looked back at the group and said quickly, "Most of them aren't really friends, just people I know. But there's someone you should meet. Wait here, and I'll go get her." Then she ran back to the crowd. After a couple of minutes, she came back with a familiar face. "Mom, Dad, this is Miranda, my roommate. Dave, remember Miranda, right?" I said, "Of course. It's nice to see you again, Miranda. It's been a while." Miranda looked a bit uneasy as we all shook hands. We talked for a few minutes, and then I asked, "Is Josh around? He graduated too, didn't he? I was hoping to see him." Miranda shook her head and said, "He's not here, Dave. I think he got a job on the West Coast and had to leave." Debbie quickly jumped in. "Dave, Mom, Dad, Miranda has agreed to be my maid of honor. Isn't that wonderful?" They all started chatting excitedly about the good news. I noticed that Miranda didn't look too happy about it. After a few minutes of talking, Miranda said she had to go see someone and excused herself. She turned and walked over to a group of 3 or 4 guys who had been watching us. One of them seemed a bit upset about something. I told Debbie what I noticed, and when she looked that way, she said, "We should get going. My car is ready in the parking lot." She took my arm, and we started walking away from the crowd, with Carl and Angela coming along behind us. Afterward, we stopped for a nice lunch at one of the better restaurants in town. Then we began the long drive home. I was behind the wheel of the Jeep with Debbie beside me, while her mom and dad followed in their car. It was a fun trip. Debbie and I chatted about the wedding, our plans for the honeymoon, and just caught up on everything. But I felt a bit sad when Debbie said she would stay the night with her parents. She understood how I felt, but explained that she needed to be home for a few days to spend time with them. Her parents did not agree with her moving in with me before the wedding, even though they knew we often stayed together. The weeks before the wedding flew by. We were both busy with work and tried to get the house ready. Most of the inside was finished, but we still needed to refinish the hardwood floors. I had set up my workshop above the garage, but I would finish it during the winter. I started to doubt if the house would ever be completely done. The wedding day arrived and passed so quickly. Debbie looked stunning as a bride, and everything went well. We had a small wedding with about 150 guests. I was surprised that Miranda was the only friend Debbie invited from college, and she didn't even bring her boyfriend. But everyone had a great time. The next day, we left for our honeymoon on the Caribbean island of St. Martin. We enjoyed 10 amazing days in the sun, eating delicious food every night. We enjoyed drinking Heineken beer, French wine, and pina coladas. I think we showed our love for each other every day. I surprised Debbie by taking her to some beaches where people could leave their clothes off. At first, she felt shy and unsure, but after a little while, she relaxed and enjoyed it. I learned she liked being in the spotlight a bit. The memory of her happily walking around with a nice tan will stay with me forever. It also helped that she was one of the most beautiful women on any beach we went to. When we got back home, we felt relaxed and ready to start our married life. I began a 6-month daytime job for the first time since I started my training. This change limited the side jobs I could take, but it meant we could spend every evening together. It also helped us reconnect with some old friends from high school that we hadn't seen much in the past few years. We were doing well financially. Debbie was so comfortable in her job that she used about half of her salary to pay off her student loans. We wanted to pay them down before we started a family. Every weekend we went to parties or danced at rock and roll bars. We even went camping twice more before it got too cold. Our group of friends, mostly from high school, became a close-knit circle. We were all pretty young, some with kids and others planning to have them soon. Sometimes we went out to bars together, but mostly we gathered for barbecues, chili cook-offs, or just enjoyed time at someone's home. I felt sad when it was time to switch back to night shifts. On one hand, it would help me take on extra jobs and work on home projects, but on the other hand, it would cut into our time for socializing. I was about 6 months away from getting my journeyman's card, and once I had it, I could work regular day shifts. One thing I didn't think about was how our shared life would change. Being home every night made our time together feel like a long honeymoon. All winter, we enjoyed our fireplace, lighting it 4 or 5 nights a week. Each time we sat together by the fire, we focused only on one another. We were close every other night and even more on weekends. But when I went back to night shifts, things changed. Other than on weekends, our time together became very rare. Debbie didn't like it when I came home late and woke her up. In the mornings, she was too busy getting ready for work, and I was often sleeping, so we missed our chances to be together. To make things better, we decided one of us would take a half-day off during the week. That way we could have a little time together. Sometimes Debbie took an afternoon off, or I would leave a little early once a week. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best we could do. Winter changed to spring, and I was hurriedly trying to finish a few home projects before summer arrived. I was almost done putting in a sunken hot tub on the deck, and I had hired someone to build a privacy fence. I was also finishing up my workshop over the garage. We had started to talk about having a baby and what we wanted for a nursery. One day, our chat turned to baby safety and how useful baby monitors are for watching over little ones. Since I worked as an electrician, I took it a step further and set up an intercom system all through the house. I even wired it for the deck and my workshop. Now, no matter where you were in the house or garage, we could listen in on the nursery. Around this time, a few other electricians asked me to join them as a junior partner in a new business they were starting. Business was getting busy, and we all wanted to operate it legally. I got a second phone line installed in our house and my workshop to keep things separate. It wasn't really needed, but it helped with taxes. As the weather warmed up, Debbie and I tried to go camping for a long weekend about once a month. Sometimes we went with a couple of friends, and other times we went just the two of us. Debbie finished her first year at her job in June. That was the reason she decided to stop taking the pill. July was our first anniversary, and we wanted to do something special. We often talked about visiting Yellowstone Park, so we decided to go in August. John and Kathy asked if they could join us. One day I slowly came back to reality and realized I was sitting in a chair on our deck, lost in thought. I had finished cleaning the van but didn't even remember doing it. It had been 3 years since Debbie and I started dating, then got engaged, and now we were married. She was the only one I ever wanted since the moment I met her. Could she really be doing this to me? I thought about John and what I knew about him. He had finished high school a year before Debbie at Gabriel's high school. They knew each other but weren't friends then. Now, John owned a construction company with a couple of partners, including his best friend, Craig. Craig and his wife were also part of our group of friends. I had known who John was for years, but we only became friends when Debbie came back from school. I remembered hearing a story some time ago about John having a partner who left the company suddenly. There were rumors that John had something to do with his partner's wife, but I figured it was just talk people had at the bar. John and Craig loved to have fun. They had a regular meeting on Friday evenings for happy hour with some other guys from the construction business. They called it a chance to network for work. I remember Kathy, John's wife, complaining loudly that John was using work as an excuse to drink and stay out late. As I sat there thinking about everything zooming around in my mind, I suddenly recalled a strange event from last winter. Just before my shift changed, I was fixing some machines in the auto factory. I noticed 4 or 5 men in suits and hard hats walking down the aisle. I watched them for a bit when one of them caught my eye. "It was my old college friend Josh," I shouted out to him, and he stopped. His face lit up when he saw me. We hugged and patted each other's backs. He had a little time to chat, so we grabbed a cup of coffee in the cafeteria. It turned out he had a new job with a company in California promoting their machinery. But he worked from their Chicago office, and General Motors was one of his clients. His area included Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan. He said he spent Mondays in the office and then traveled from Tuesday to Friday. We chatted about our jobs, and I shared my experience with the apprenticeship program and my goal to go back to school for my degree. Then I chuckled and said, "Of course my wife will have something to say about that." He looked surprised and said, "You got married? Congrats. When did that happen?" I told him it was last August and asked if he was still single. He shook his head and said he was too busy to date anyone seriously. "So what's her name?" he asked with a smile. "Come on, Josh, you know her. Debbie Königsknecht. You introduced me to her before I graduated, remember?" "Yeah, I remember. She was Miranda's roommate in college. So did you two get together after school?" he asked, looking confused. "No way, Josh. I wasn't going to let her get away after I met her. We were together during Debbie's last 2 years of school, and we even got engaged just before her final year began." Josh's face changed in ways I couldn't understand before he said quietly, "Oh, I didn't know that." Then he suddenly looked at his watch and said he had to leave. I walked him to the door, and before he left, I asked for his business card because I wanted to call him. He said, "Sure, sure," shook my hand, and hurried away. I started to wonder why he seemed in such a hurry. I called him a couple of times in the following month to see if we could meet up. Both times he mentioned he was busy and promised to call me back, but he never did. Now, thinking back on his reaction along with other memories and what I found out this morning, I realized he was surprised about the news of our engagement. I thought he knew something about Debbie, so I decided to leave before we talked about her. I had a feeling that whatever he knew wasn't good. I took his business card out of my wallet and thought about it for a while before making a decision. Since it was Monday, I believed he would be at his office. I picked up the kitchen phone and quickly dialed his number. When he picked up, I said quietly, "Josh, it's Dave." "Oh, hey, Dave, what's going on?" he replied, sounding cautious. "I was hoping we could meet up this week since you're around," I said. I don't think this week will be good," he replied. "Listen, Josh, I know you're avoiding me. I have some information about Debbie that I think you already know. I really want to talk to you about it," I said plainly. There was a quiet pause for a few minutes before he replied, "Are you sure you want to do this, Dave? Wouldn't it be better to just leave things alone?" No, Josh. I think whatever is going on is still happening. We used to be good friends, and I trust you to tell me the truth. There was quiet on the phone, and then he said, "Okay, Dave, I can change my plans and be there tomorrow. Will that be okay?" That would be great, Josh. Let's meet at the Westgate Tavern near the assembly plant. You know where that is? Yes, I can be there by about 1. Thanks, Josh. I know this isn't easy for you, but it really means a lot to me. We ended the call, and I went back to getting ready for the trip to Yellowstone. I thought about finishing some projects around the house, but then I wondered, does that even matter anymore? The next day, I arrived at the bar just before 1 and found a booth to sit in. About 15 minutes later, Josh walked in and saw me. He walked over, shook my hand, and sat down without a smile. "How about a beer and a burger?" I asked. He nodded, and we ordered. For a few minutes, we just looked at our glasses. Finally, I said, "Let me tell you about my life from when I met Debbie until we got married. Then you can share what you saw at college, okay?" I talked about the year we dated, how we broke up, and how we got back together. I shared how much I loved her and how hard I tried to win her heart. I told him about our engagement and the year before the wedding. I explained how happy it all made me. I talked about the good and bad times and all the small things that had happened that I was now unsure about. When I finished, Josh cleared his throat and said, "I don't see why you're worried, Dave." Then I shared the story of the Yellowstone trip and what I found when I cleaned the van. I couldn't ignore the conclusion I came to. When I was done, Dave looked upset and said, "Wow, women." He shook his head. He paused for a while, then said, "Did you know I still see Miranda from time to time?" I shook my head no. She still lives in her hometown of Milwaukee, but comes to Chicago for work sometimes. Anyway, after we ran into each other and you told me about getting married, I called her and planned to meet for dinner the next time she was in town. Usually she is really nice. We went out several times in college and even spent some time together, but we still stayed friends. However, as soon as I mentioned that I saw you, she became quiet. I got upset with her and said that she and Debbie were trying to trick you. I made her feel really bad, and in the end, she talked about everything. I think she felt better after that. Miranda and Debbie lived together for the last 3 years of college. It turns out Miranda was the only one Debbie spoke to about you. I need to tell you, Dave, some of it is not nice. It can't be worse than what I imagine, I said with bitterness. Well, only you can decide that, he replied, looking uneasy. You probably didn't know that I spent the first semester of our junior year studying in Europe. That's why we lost touch. When I came back for the second semester, I'd forgotten that you and Debbie had gone out before I left. Debbie was acting the same as she did the year before, going out a few times a week. But this time, her dating was more serious. She would go out with a guy for a month or so. Once things started getting serious, she would break it off. She was seeing other guys, and it wasn't really a secret. I think Miranda was just as involved. Anyway, Miranda said that Debbie just couldn't stay away from boys, even though she was with you back home. Debbie told Miranda she had the best of both worlds, a boyfriend who cared for her and the chance to enjoy herself 400 miles away. Then she disappointed you by going to Texas with Miranda for spring break. A group of frat guys from school were going, and they invited Debbie and Miranda to go along. I guess Debbie didn't think much about what that would mean until she got back and you wanted nothing to do with her. She couldn't handle that. She told Miranda she would do everything she could to win you back. When Debbie returned for their senior year, she told Miranda she was engaged to you. Miranda thought that meant everything had changed, but it really hadn't. Debbie started right where she left off in the spring. But how could she keep it a secret? She had a nice engagement ring, and for Christmas, I gave her a 2-year-old Jeep that was in my name. She came down to see me almost every month, I said. Josh shrugged. She never wore the engagement ring at school. She told everyone her dad got her the Jeep. Before the summer break last May, Miranda and Debbie planned to rent a house close to school for their senior year. Miranda's boyfriend at the time was part of the plan. "Oh, right, Tom," he answered when I called the house one morning, I said, feeling unsure. Josh looked at me with sympathy. Miranda's boyfriend was actually Dan. Tom was Debbie's boyfriend from the previous year. She invited him to join Dan when they moved in. They were splitting the rent 4 ways, not 3. The 4 of them lived in that house together until graduation. I covered my face with my hands and tried to stop shaking. Oh no, oh no, oh no. There's more, Dave. They all went to Florida for spring break together. I heard Tom paid for Debbie's trip since they drove your Jeep. I shook my head. How did she and Miranda keep me a secret from their boyfriends? I called there every week and wrote to them too. Oh, they knew Debbie was seeing someone back home, but she made it seem like it wasn't a big deal. Only Miranda knew it was serious. The night before graduation, a group of seniors had a private party at one of the fraternity houses. I heard that Debbie and Tom spent the night together. When they woke up the next day to go to graduation, Debbie told Tom she was going back home to get married. He didn't take it very well. Two thoughts crossed my mind. At the graduation ceremony, there was one guy who looked really angry. Debbie seemed nervous about running into him. Plus, I noticed she didn't want to stay over with me after we got home, especially since she'd just spent the night with her boyfriend. It became clear why that was. I couldn't believe how foolish I had been. I realized that I had been tricked right from the start. How can someone be so mean and pretend to be nice for so long? I whispered, tears streaming down my face. Josh looked away and replied, I don't know, Dave. She just did. Miranda was friends with her, but even she was shocked in the end. The last thing she wanted was to be Debbie's maid of honor and see you. She was still dating Dan during the wedding and didn't want to bring him along because he might say something wrong. We talked for a bit more and shared another beer. I couldn't eat anything. I felt like I would just get sick. I knew I would cry more later. Finally, Josh asked, What are you going to do, Dave? It's finished, Josh. 3 years. I put 3 long years into this relationship, 3 years of her lying to me again and again. She was the most important person in my life since the day I met her, but to her, our relationship meant nothing, I said with anger. We sat quietly for a few minutes as I tried to calm down. Now I understood how someone could hurt another in a fit of strong feelings. Everything you told me was before we got married. I need to find out what she is doing now for my own peace of mind. Maybe I will get an answer to why this happened. After that, she will be out of my life, I said with clenched teeth. When we finally said goodbye at his car, I said, Please don't tell Miranda that we met. I don't want Debbie to think I know anything. Of course, Dave. Call me anytime. I'm sorry for not being there for you. I just didn't want to get involved. We shook hands and went our separate ways. I got home about an hour before I had to leave for work, just in time to answer a call from Debbie. Usually she would try to reach me during the day. If we missed each other, I would call her back during my dinner break. I tried to stay calm, even though her voice annoyed me. She joked about which night I would come home early this week for some fun. I tried to sound sorry when I told her I couldn't leave early any day this week because so many people were on vacation. That was a lie. Then she offered to take Wednesday or Thursday afternoon off. Again, I told her, sadly, that I had promised to work a side job those days and couldn't be home, which wasn't true either. Thinking she wouldn't take me up on it, I casually mentioned that I would be home all day Friday if she wanted to visit. She paused for a moment and then replied that she didn't think she could take off on Friday. We finally said goodbye after sharing I love you. I gazed at the phone, remembering something John mentioned during our trip to Yellowstone. He said he would be working in Southfield all week, but he joked that he would return just in time for happy hour on Friday. I found Kathy's work number and called her. When she picked up, I asked if John was still away. She said he was. I told her I wanted to borrow some tools from him. She mentioned he would be back on Friday and added with a laugh that it would probably be just in time for happy hour. I said I would talk to him over the weekend and hung up. I started to worry that if Debbie and John were a couple, they would find a chance to meet again soon. Since John was away until Friday and I would be home all weekend, Friday night seemed like the perfect time for them. Then I remembered something from earlier in the summer. I woke up early on a Saturday morning before Debbie. I took my coffee outside to the deck, and I noticed the hot tub was not very tidy. The cover was off, and there were a few empty beer cans around it. Some wet beach towels were hanging over the deck railing. When Debbie finally woke up, I asked her about the mess. She seemed a bit shy and told me that she went out for drinks with some girls from work. They came back to our house and used the hot tub. She said she was sorry for not cleaning up afterwards. This made me curious about who was with her. She had mentioned getting together with her friends on Friday nights a few times. That night, after work, I felt uneasy about sleeping next to her. so I decided to sleep on the hide-a-bed in the study instead. A few hours later, she called me from work, surprised, and asked why I hadn't come to bed. I told her I felt sick and didn't want to wake her up. She told me to take some Pepto-Bismol and get some rest. Just before she hung up, she asked, "By the way, did you check the pH in the hot tub since we got back from Yellowstone?" I replied, "Nope, I haven't." "Can you do that, please? I would hate for it to get messed up if we want to use it soon," she said playfully. After I hung up, I thought, it looks like someone plans to use the hot tub soon, and it won't be me. Whatever happens, it seems like it will happen on Friday night. I decided then to take Friday off work. That night at work, I started thinking about how to gather some information. I knew I could ask my electrician friends for help, but maybe not on such short notice. Then an idea came to me. When I was younger, I installed an intercom system to listen in on things. The next morning, I grabbed some tools and began taking off the covers of the intercoms. I discovered that by adjusting a few wires, I could set each unit to only send sound. I made changes to all of them, including the one near the hot tub. Now, the only intercom that could receive sound was the one in my workshop above the garage. I tested them with a portable radio and found that I could hear it in every room from my workshop. To improve it further, I ran to an electronics store and bought 6 tiny, very sensitive microphones. I replaced the original parts in the intercoms with these new microphones and noticed their ability to pick up sound was about 20% better. After finishing this project, I sat in my workshop, realizing that now I could listen in on everything happening in the house. I needed a way to record what I heard. I had an old tape player that one of the other electricians had given me to try out. It was a reel-to-reel type, which made it feel pretty outdated. I had recorded some music on it and sometimes played it while I was working on other projects. That day, I decided to test it again. I put the microphone close to the intercom speaker and tried it out with the radio from a couple of rooms in the house. When I played it back, it sounded great. The tape reel was so big that I thought it could hold more than 6 hours of recordings. I stood up and looked out the small window. The garage was placed at a good angle so I could see the backyard, the deck, and part of the kitchen through the sliding glass door. If the shades were up, I could also look into the master bedroom upstairs. At night, I would probably just see some shadows unless the light was just right. But I thought that sound would be enough for what I needed. That night at work, I called home like I usually did. Debbie and I talked for a little while. She told me she missed me a lot and wished I could come home early. I acted sad, pretending I really couldn't. I promised her we would have fun together this weekend. She asked casually if the hot tub was working, and I said it was fine, but that wasn't true. I slept on the hide-a-bed again that night, like I had all week. On Friday, Debbie called me just before I was about to leave for work. She said she was going out for drinks and maybe dinner with some friends after work. She wanted to let me know in case I tried to call and she wasn't back. I told her no problem. I mentioned I had to work some extra hours that night, so I would be home a bit late, too. The way she was twisting the truth and lying so easily shocked me. She seemed so relaxed about it. How had I let myself be tricked for over 3 years? Was it because she was pretty? Was I so wrapped up in being in love that I couldn't see what was happening around me? Did I have a big flaw that let her hurt me like this? As I thought about these questions, I moved the van to a quiet street a few blocks away from my house. There was a small path through some trees in our mostly empty neighborhood that I used to sneak around to the back of our garage without being seen. I quietly slipped in through the back door and went up to the workshop. I sank into an old, worn-out chair I had there. I leaned back and closed my eyes, feeling suddenly tired after days without enough sleep and too much worry. Out of nowhere, I woke up to darkness inside and outside. The sound of the garage door opening startled me. I glanced at my watch and was surprised to see it was almost 8 o'clock. I had been asleep for nearly 3 hours. I quietly walked to the door leading down to the garage and opened it just a little. I saw the Jeep pull in and noticed Debbie's head as she walked back outside. I quietly moved to the dormer window, where I could see part of a car in the driveway. John was standing in the soft light from the porch. They came together and hugged, then walked toward the house and went inside. I could hear the keys jingling in the lock, then the door opened and voices started to come through. I quickly turned on the recorder and sat down at my workbench so I could watch the back of the house. "Just wait a bit," Debbie said with a laugh. John replied with something I couldn't hear. "I need to use the bathroom. Pour me a glass of wine and get a beer," she said, as she walked through the kitchen. I heard her press the button on the answering machine on the counter as she passed by, and the message played back saying, "No new messages." After a moment, I noticed a light turn on in our bedroom. I saw her walk by the open window and into the master bathroom. I could hear her wash her hands and the toilet flush. At the same time, I could hear John looking through our pantry. I heard the sound of bottles clinking. Then I heard a cork pop as he opened a bottle of wine and poured a glass. The fridge door opened, and I heard him twist the cap off a beer. I felt annoyed because it was clear he knew where everything was and was acting like he belonged there. Debbie walked out of the bathroom again, right in front of the bedroom window. I was surprised to see that she seemed to be unclothed. She walked over to her dresser, bent down, and took something from a bottom drawer. Then she stood up, wrapped it around her shoulders, and tied it. The shiny silver fabric reminded me of the perio I had bought her in St. Martin during our honeymoon. It was so light that it was nearly see-through, and when she wore it, it barely covered her backside. She turned toward the door, and the bedroom light went off. A minute later, in the soft glow of the kitchen, I saw her walk by the sliding glass door and heard them share a kiss. "Wow, that outfit is something else," John said. "Thanks. Does it catch your eye?" Debbie replied with a laugh. "Seems a bit wasted on Dave, if you ask me," he said. "Come on, be nice," Debbie gasped, as it sounded like someone was getting a little too curious. "Oh, yes, I think you do like it," she whispered. "That perio from our honeymoon," I thought sadly. She usually saved it for special times. Now she wore it for him. For several minutes, I listened to a mix of moans and kissing sounds before Debbie finally spoke. "Let's get into the hot tub." "Come on, let's just go upstairs, Debbie," John said with a bit of a whine. "We have all night, my dear. Dave is working late." She opened the sliding door and stepped out onto the deck, with John right behind her. I noticed two soft lights on either side of the tub as Debbie knelt down to take off the tub cover. She stood up in front of John and loosened her wrap, letting it fall to the deck. Then she quickly stepped into the tub, sinking down into the warm water. John didn't waste any time. He took off his clothes and climbed in next to her. They laughed, talked, and enjoyed their drinks, seeming to forget all their worries. It was clear they were comfortable together, and this was not their first time here. John got out of the tub to grab another beer. When he returned, he stood on the step in the water right in front of Debbie. I could just see the shape of his excitement in front of her. "Did you see Craig's face when we left the bar and you asked me if I was coming over for a bit?" He laughed. I watched her reach out, gently touching him with both hands. "Yeah, he seemed a bit jealous, I think," she said casually. Then she leaned closer, and it sounded like she was giving him attention. John let out a pleased sound and said, "Oh yeah, that's it." She leaned back but kept her hands moving. John took a sip of his beer and said, "Yeah, he was a little upset, but it's not like you haven't been with him before." I noticed Debbie's hands stopped, and she looked a bit annoyed. "You two really share everything, don't you?" "Usually," he replied with a chuckle. "It only happened once, and it won't happen again," she said firmly. "Oh, why's that?" "Because the difference between you two is when Craig has a few drinks, he can't follow through." I realized that seeing my wife with another man didn't feel right for me. It just confirmed that our marriage was over. They were together for about 10 or 15 minutes before John exclaimed, "I'm coming!" and fell forward onto her. From the noises Debbie made, it seemed she was really enjoying herself. John then got up and left the bathroom, probably to throw away a used item. He returned with another beer and a glass of wine, which he gave to Debbie, who was now relaxing back in the tub. They sat close together, drinking, talking softly, and sharing gentle kisses. After a bit, John said, "Making love in the van at Yellowstone was amazing. Skipping the hike so we could have some time alone was clever." Debbie laughed and replied, "If Dave and Kathy only knew, all they talked about was the lake and the fishing. Ha, I think I had the better view. And boy, did I really need that. It was the only time I connected with someone during the whole trip," John complained. "What's wrong? You and Kathy not getting along?" "We're fine by her standards, but since Jake was born, she thinks that being intimate is only for having kids, not for fun." Suddenly, she acts like the good Catholic girl she never was when we dated. Now, when I want to be close, it's a huge discussion. And even then, it's just the same old thing in the dark, he said with a frown. Debbie chuckled. Oh, poor you. Thank goodness you accepted my invitation to happy hour that Friday. I'm really glad we connected. Being with you was amazing. You can thank Dave for that. If he hadn't switched to second shift, maybe I wouldn't have felt like it. Besides, you probably would have just tried to charm someone else if it wasn't me. Maybe. But you are the most amazing woman I've ever been with. Well, I should thank him for not finishing what he started with you. Oh, don't get me wrong, he does his part just fine, but you're here and he isn't. After a few moments of quiet, John asked, Why did you two start dating in the first place? It doesn't sound like real love to me. Back in college, I had a lot of boyfriends, but I liked having someone special at home, too. That's where Dave came in. He was sweet and kept trying, and I thought he was nice-looking. When we were together, I imagined maybe marriage could be nice. But then I'd go back to school, and I wasn't so sure anymore. But with all those boyfriends in college, what made you decide to settle down with him? Well, John, just look at this house. It could be in a magazine. He earns at least twice as much as those frat guys from school. Of course, he works really hard, too. But Dave gives me pretty much anything I want. I have him wrapped around my finger. As soon as we start having kids, I probably won't need to work anymore. Debbie sighed and leaned her head back. Oh, yes, I'll have everything. A lovely home, nice cars, a few kids, and a husband who makes good money and is kind enough to change shifts now and then, letting me have some fun. What more could a girl want? When she said that, I sighed and slumped against the wall. I felt like I had been hit hard. Was that what our relationship was really about? Just money and things? Speaking of what a girl wants, how about we head to the bedroom for a bit? John suggested playfully, and I saw him lean over to kiss her. Oh, what's this? Someone wants to have some fun again. How about I sit on your lap? Come on, Debbie, let's go upstairs. I've been with Dave's wife before, and now I want to be with her in Dave's bed. That would really be something, don't you think? You can be so rude sometimes, Debbie said, laughing. All right, I thought. I've had enough. Time to get that guy out of my house. I picked up the house phone and called our number. As it rang, I heard Debbie say, Shh, that's probably Dave. I told him not to call. Are you going to pick it up? John asked. Nah, let it go to the machine, she replied. After the fourth ring, the answering machine took over. After the beep, I tried to sound calm and said, Hey, babe, you must still be out. I'm not feeling too good tonight. My boss said I could leave early, so I will be home soon. Bye for now. Then I sat back and watched as things started to go wrong. Debbie jumped to her feet, grabbed a towel, and said, John, you have to leave now. What, why? We have time, he replied. No, he told me sometimes he can get home in 15 or 20 minutes, especially if the traffic is light and he catches all the green lights. I need to clean this up and make it look like I just got home before he arrives. Now please step outside and help me put the cover back on the hot tub. John kept complaining as he helped her with the cover. Come on, John, just get dressed. It seemed like she picked up his clothes and tossed them at him, and I could hear her picking up empty beer cans. They both went into the house, and I heard her tell him to call her next week before the door slammed shut. I listened as his car started and slowly drove away. I stopped looking out the window and sank back into my recliner. For a while, I could hear Debbie moving around inside, the sound of the television playing, and the water running as she washed the dishes in the sink. I sat there thinking about my life, my marriage, and what the future might hold. The last thing I heard from the house was a frustrated Debbie say, Come on, Dave. You messed up my night, so where are you? I thought to myself, that's just too bad. I closed my eyes for a moment, and then I noticed it had been very quiet for a while. I looked at my watch. It was after midnight. The house was dark and still except for the porch light. I turned off the tape recorder, exited through the back door of the garage, and walked back to the van. I drove around to the front of the house and parked in the driveway. Without turning on the lights, I quietly entered the house. Not feeling tired, I grabbed a soda from the fridge and went out onto the deck. I sat there in the dark, watching the stars and thinking that I would have to end things tomorrow. A heavy feeling of sadness settled over me like a dark cloud. With a sigh, I got up and walked toward the house. As I did, I kicked something that quickly moved toward the hot tub. I bent down and picked up what looked like a wallet. I stepped into the kitchen and opened it. By the light of the night, I could see John's driver's license. I carefully walked up the stairs and paused for a moment at the bedroom door. I listened to Debbie's calm breathing. Then, I turned towards my study and my pull-out bed, deciding to sleep alone again. I tossed the wallet onto the desk and a bunch of things fell out. Something shiny caught my eye. I reached down and picked up a small packet. I slowly put it back on the desk and lay down on the pull-out bed, pulling the blanket up over me. I woke up slowly as sunlight filled the room. I could hear the soft sound of the shower running in the master bathroom. Everything that had happened the night before flooded back to me all at once. I managed to stand up and shuffled into the other bathroom to take care of things. After that, I washed my face and looked into the mirror at my tired eyes. I walked back into our bedroom just as Debbie came out of the master bathroom, wrapped in a towel. "Hey, what happened to you last night?" she asked. "What do you mean?" I replied, feeling a bit confused. "You said you would be home early, but you never came." She stepped closer and gave me a quick kiss on the lips. "Something came up at work, and my boss made me stay until after midnight," I explained. "Are you feeling okay now? You really need to shave," she said, gently touching my cheek. "I still feel a bit sick," I admitted, which was the honest truth. She smiled warmly at me. "Well, I have something that will help you feel better," she said as she took off her towel. Her beauty always amazed me, and I couldn't help but admire her. She smiled wider when she saw how I reacted. I looked into her eyes, searching for any signs of guilt or doubt. "Of course you need to keep him away from the beer so he can last longer." Debbie finally managed to say with a weak voice, "What did you say?" I leaned in close to her and said firmly, "I think you heard me." "Now get out of my house!" I nearly shouted. She looked so shocked that she rolled away from me and fell off the bed, landing with a thud. Her head popped up from the blankets, her eyes wide and her mouth open until she stuttered, You're not making any sense." "No? Or maybe Tom would be ready to help. You remember Tom? Your roommate from college?" I said with a sarcastic tone, making her gasp. I went over to her drawers and pulled them open. I tossed a pair of jeans and a shirt at her and said, "Get dressed, now." "You're leaving." She stood across the bed from me, starting to cry. But Dave, I live here." "Not anymore. Now get dressed or you'll have to go outside like that." I grabbed my clothes and went into the living room. I pulled the phone book from the drawer and found the number for Yellow Cab. I called and asked for a taxi to come quickly. I put on my clothes and returned to the bedroom. Debbie was sitting on the edge of the bed, wearing only her underwear and crying. "What don't you get?" I said, grabbing her arm and pulling her up. "Put your clothes on now!" I was shouting again. All I wanted was for her to leave as fast as possible. Crying, she struggled to put on her jeans. I searched through her closet and tossed a pair of sandals to her. She pulled a shirt over her head, and without looking at me, she cried, "Please, Dave, I love you. Don't do this to me." Angry, I replied, "You love me? What does that even mean? You are a liar who doesn't understand what love really is." She fell down and cried on the floor, hugging her head. I picked up her sandals and took her hands, pulling her back onto her knees. Then I started to drag her to the door. She got back on her feet as we reached the hallway and began to go down the stairs. She stumbled and fell again before we reached the bottom, but I kept pulling her along on the floor into the kitchen. When I let go, she just sat there with her hands over her face, crying. I filled a glass with water and poured it over her head. She gasped and tried to stand up, using the kitchen counter to help her balance because she was so upset. Just then, I heard a car horn from the driveway, and she looked up with a confused expression and whispered, "What's that? That's your cab. You're going for a ride." But, what about my Jeep? I have a Jeep." "No, I have a Jeep. It's in my name, remember?" She looked shocked as I grabbed her key ring and took off the house and car keys. I tossed the key ring into her purse and handed it back to her. "Come on, let's go." I gently took her arm and led her toward the side door. She tried to speak through her tears, but I wasn't paying attention. I helped her into the back seat of the cab and closed the door. I leaned into the cab and gave the driver a 50. "Take her to 5935 West Barnes Road," I told him. The driver looked at the woman in the back seat, who was still very upset. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Yeah, that's where she lives now. Here's another 20 to make sure she doesn't come back here." You got it. He quickly put the car in reverse and backed out of the driveway. I watched them drive away and then slowly walked back inside the house. I took a beer from the refrigerator and sank into a kitchen chair, staring blankly at the wall as my anger faded. It was over. Really over. For almost 3 years, my life had been about Debbie. Everything I did was to make her happy. I felt empty and lost as I understood that was all finished. For a while, I just sat there with tears on my cheeks. Eventually, I began to think about what I needed to do next and what would follow after that. Then I laughed with relief when I realized I had a plan. My life had not ended. I picked up the phone and dialed. "Carl, it's Dave. I wanted to let you know that Debbie is on her way to your house. She's no longer welcome here. You can send someone to grab the rest of her things. And no, I don't want to talk about it right now. Bye." I hung up. I sat there, sipping my beer, and felt the stress melt away. Once I finished the beer, I went upstairs, took a long, hot shower, shaved, and put on fresh clothes. I stood in our bedroom, thinking about where to start. I grabbed some boxes and filled them with Debbie's personal items. Then I began going through Debbie's closets and drawers, putting everything into trash bags. When I was done, a big pile was on the floor. I took a box into the den to pack up Debbie's college books. As I did, I noticed John's wallet on the desk. I picked it up and looked through it thoughtfully. Deciding what to do next, I picked up the phone and called him. After a few rings, Kathy answered. I always liked Kathy. She was smart, cute, hardworking, and fun to be around. I felt bad about what I was about to say, but she needed to hear the truth. "Kathy, it's Dave. Is John there?" "Hi, Dave. He's still sleeping. Can I have him call you when he wakes up? Just let him know he can come by and pick up his wallet anytime." "His wallet? How did it end up there?" she asked, sounding confused. "I think he lost it when he changed clothes last night." "Is this some kind of joke?" she asked, starting to laugh. "I don't think so," I said seriously. "Okay, but why was he changing clothes?" "Well, he had to change to get into the hot tub with Debbie." "Dave, that's not funny. I told you I was serious. Is Debbie there? Can I talk to her?" "Debbie doesn't live here anymore, Kathy." Silence filled the line for a moment. Then she said, oh no, he didn't. Oh yes, he really did. I have to go," she whispered into the phone. "Please tell John I really want him to come get his wallet." "I need to talk to him," I said with a lot of anger. Without saying anything else, she hung up the phone. An hour later, I was taking another bag of Debbie's things out to the garage when a car pulled into the driveway. I stopped to watch Sarah get out and walk over to me. She stood with her hands on her hips and said, "So she finally hurt you, huh?" "Yeah," I admitted, feeling a bit upset. She looked at the bags I was packing up and asked, "Is there any hope?" "Not a chance," I said firmly. She nodded, understanding. "Did you come to take her things?" I asked. "Nope. I came to see how you are doing," she replied. "Huh?" I said, not quite getting it. "I'll take them with me when I leave, but I really wanted to know if you're really done with her, and if you're ready to let me in." "I don't get it." "Dave, I've liked you for a long time, ever since you started going out with Debbie. When you and she made up after your breakup, I told her she better treat you well or I would step in. I know it's a bit early to think you might want to date your soon-to-be ex-sister-in-law, but I just wanted to let you know I'm interested. Give it some thought. Now let's help me load her stuff into the car, and I'll take it away." Before she got into her car, she said, "By the way, Debbie is at home. Mom and Dad are trying to help her because she's really upset. I guess getting caught has finally shattered her little dream world. Seems like there really is some justice in the world." She laughed, gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, and drove off. I watched her leave, feeling confused. I didn't know what to expect when she arrived, but it certainly wasn't that. A few days later, Kathy came by to pick up John's wallet. I played the tape for her, and she started to cry. As she dried her tears, she said, "I know this wasn't the first time. I think he was messing around a few years back with his old business partner's wife. He suddenly left the business, and John couldn't tell me why. When she left, she asked if I could make her a copy of the tape. I said okay. Carl started calling me almost every day, wanting to set up a meeting with Debbie and me. After the fourth call, I told him no way, not a chance. so I made a copy of the tape and sent it to him. He only called me once after that to say he was sorry. I also sent a copy to Kathy and my lawyer. Later, I found out that Kathy and John were no longer together, but they were trying marriage counseling. I had never put Debbie's name on the title of the house. I kept a record of every dollar I spent on it. Eventually, I agreed to let go of the Jeep since there were questions about whether it was a gift to her. A few pieces of furniture and sharing the money in the bank accounts wrapped up the property settlement. I think the existence of the tape made Debbie and her lawyer think twice about asking for more. They didn't want me to show it to a judge. I put the house up for sale as soon as I knew it wouldn't be seen as shared property. I didn't want to live in it anymore. I had bought and fixed it up for one reason, and that reason was no longer there. The house was a painful reminder of a part of my past that I wanted to forget. It sold pretty easily, and just as I thought, I made a good amount of money. Around the same time my divorce was final, I also earned my journeyman's card. With everything falling into place, I decided to chase my dream of going back to school. An electrical engineer with an electrician's card is always needed. I took time off from the auto plant and re-enrolled in college. With the money I got from selling my house, I had more than enough to pay for my last 3 semesters of school and cover my living costs. I kept working for the company about 15 to 20 hours a week. With my job and my savings, I could live well. So I found a condo close to the college I was now attending. It just so happened to be the same school where Sarah was studying. Was that a coincidence? Maybe. They do have a great engineering program. Sarah and I still met up about once a week for lunch, drinks, or just to chat. She updated me on Debbie without me needing to ask. Carl and Angela were so upset with her that as soon as she got her Jeep back, they told her to move out. Soon after the divorce, she moved to a store in the suburbs of Detroit. They don't see her much anymore. Debbie tried to reach out to me both before and after the divorce was final. She sent a message through Sarah because I wasn't answering her calls. I asked Sarah to tell Debbie that I was moving on. There was nothing she could say to change my mind. Sarah and I are getting closer. I have to admit that I feel a strong attraction to her. Every time we meet, she playfully brings up her wish for us to be together. I'm getting used to the idea of starting fresh, and she looks really good to me. Not long ago, she playfully suggested we live together to save money while we both finish school. So far, I have held back, but I think she can tell I'm starting to weaken. Is there a K-13 curse? If there is, I think I am in trouble. Weeks turned into months, and I threw myself into work and the house renovations with a fervor that surprised even me. Every nail I hammered, every wall I painted, felt like an exorcism of the pain and betrayal that had seeped into my life. The house began to take shape in a way that mirrored my resolve, strong, functional, and with little room for unnecessary frills. I knew I had to stay busy, or the creeping thoughts of Debbie would consume me. Despite my efforts to move on, Debbie kept reaching out. It started with small gestures. A message left on my voicemail, a casual card in the mail, an invitation to join her and her parents for dinner. I turned them down each time, but the distance I tried to keep didn't deter her. She seemed determined to weave her way back into my life as though nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Then came the unexpected twist. I received a call from Carl, Debbie's father, who had become somewhat of a mentor and friend over the years. He didn't hide his concern. "Dave, I don't know how to say this, but I'm worried about Debbie," Carl began, his voice heavy with the kind of weariness that comes from sleepless nights. "What's wrong, Carl?" I asked, though a part of me already feared the answer. "She's been different lately. Withdrawn, anxious. She's been talking about things that don't make sense, like seeing someone following her or finding things in her apartment moved around. At first, I thought she was just stressed from work, but it's gotten worse." My stomach tightened. Debbie had always been high-spirited, sometimes a bit impulsive, but never paranoid. This was something new, something unsettling. I felt the familiar pull of concern for her, but I knew better than to get too involved. "Have you talked to her about it?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Of course, but she brushes it off. Says she's just tired. But Angela and I can tell something's off. I was hoping you might reach out to her, see if she'll open up to you." I hesitated. The last thing I wanted was to be drawn back into Debbie's orbit, but Carl's plea weighed on me. He was a good man, and I owed him a lot. Reluctantly, I agreed to check in on her. When I finally called Debbie, she sounded surprised, but there was a palpable relief in her voice. We agreed to meet at a small cafe in town, one of those places we used to visit back when things were simple. Seeing her again stirred a mix of emotions I wasn't prepared for. Debbie looked tired, her once vibrant eyes dulled by something more than just lack of sleep. She smiled when she saw me, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Dave, thank you for coming," she said softly as we settled into a booth near the back of the cafe. "No problem, Debbie. Your dad called me. He's worried about you. And well, so am I admitted. She looked down at her hands, twisting the ring I had given her so long ago. It struck me that she was still wearing it, even after everything. "I don't know what's happening, Dave. I feel like I'm losing my mind," she whispered. "It's like someone's watching me, but when I try to catch them, there's no one there. And at home, it's like someone's been there, moving things, leaving the lights on. I don't understand it." I frowned, trying to piece together what she was telling me. Debbie wasn't the type to imagine things, and the fear in her voice was real. "Have you talked to anyone else about this? Like the police?" I asked. She shook her head. "I'm afraid they'll think I'm crazy. Maybe I am." I reached across the table, placing my hand over hers. "You're not crazy, Debbie. But you need to take this seriously. Let's get you some help, okay? Maybe a private investigator or at least a therapist who can help you sort through what's happening." She nodded, looking more vulnerable than I had ever seen her. "Okay, Dave. I'll do that. Thank you." We parted ways after that, but the conversation stayed with me. Something about her story didn't sit right, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it than just paranoia. I decided to do some digging on my own, just to see if there was anything I could find that might explain what was happening to her. The more I looked into it, the more bizarre the situation became. There were no signs of a break-in at her apartment, no suspicious activity reported in the area. But Debbie's fear wasn't unfounded. She was genuinely scared, and I began to wonder if this was some kind of elaborate game someone was playing with her. I eventually enlisted the help of a private investigator, a no-nonsense guy named Rick, who had a reputation for uncovering the truth, no matter how unpleasant. He agreed to take on the case, though he warned me it might not be what I wanted to hear. A few weeks later, Rick called me with his findings. His voice was grim. "Dave, I've got some news. I'm not sure how you'll take it, but you need to hear it." I braced myself. "Go ahead." Debbie's not being followed, at least not by anyone other than herself. But she's definitely not alone in this. "What do you mean?" Rick sighed. "She's been involved with someone else, Dave, a guy named Tom. He's been in and out of her life for a while now, even before you two got back together. The reason she's paranoid is because things have gone south with him. She broke it off, but he didn't take it well. That's why she's seeing things, hearing things. He's been messing with her, trying to scare her." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt a cold anger rising inside me, but it was tempered by a strange sense of relief. At least I wasn't the one losing my mind. "Do you know where he is now?" I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "He's been laying low, but I've got a lead on his location. What do you want to do?" I paused, considering my options. I could let the authorities handle it, let them deal with Tom and whatever twisted game he was playing. But a part of me wanted to confront him myself, to see the face of the man who had torn apart what little piece I had left. "Let's find him," I said, my decision made. Rick gave me an address, a rundown apartment on the outskirts of town. I decided to go alone, despite Rick's offer to come with me. This was something I needed to do on my own. When I arrived, the place was as shabby as I expected. The building looked like it hadn't seen a coat of paint in decades, and the windows were streaked with grime. I made my way up the creaking stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. The door to Tom's apartment was slightly ajar, and I pushed it open, stepping into the dimly lit space. The stench of stale beer and unwashed clothes hit me immediately. The place was a mess, with empty bottles and discarded takeout containers littering the floor. And there, slouched on the couch, was Tom. He looked up as I entered, his bloodshot eyes narrowing in recognition. He was younger than I expected, probably in his late 20s, with greasy hair and a thin, wiry frame. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "What do you want?" he snarled, his voice slurred. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I know what you've been doing to Debbie. It ends now," Tom sneered. but there was fear behind his eyes. "You don't know anything, don't I? I know you've been following her, breaking into her place, trying to scare her. You think that's going to make her come back to you?" He stood up, unsteady on his feet. "She's mine. She belongs with me, not you." I stepped closer, my fists clenched at my sides. "She's not yours. She's not anyone's. And if you come near her again, you'll regret it." Tom's bravado faltered, and he stumbled back, knocking over a stack of beer cans. "You can't tell me what to do?" "Maybe not, but the cops can. I've got enough on you to make sure you spend the next few years behind bars. So you've got a choice. Leave her alone, or I make sure you never have the chance to hurt anyone again." He glared at me, but the fight had gone out of him. "Fine. She's not worth it anyway." I didn't wait for him to say anything else. I turned and walked out, leaving him to stew in his own misery. As I drove away, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Satisfaction at confronting him, sadness for what could have been, and a deep sense of finality. Whatever feelings I had left for Debbie, they were now buried under the rubble of our broken relationship. The following weeks were a blur. I focused on work, on finishing the house, on anything that would keep my mind off Debbie and the mess that had unfolded. I didn't hear from her, and I didn't reach out. I hoped she was okay, but I knew I had done all I could. Then, one day out of the blue, I received a call from Carl. His voice was strained, and I could tell something was wrong. "Dave, it's Debbie. She's gone." The words didn't register at first. "What do you mean, gone?" "She's dead, Dave. They found her in her apartment. An overdose." I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. "No, that can't be. I'm so sorry, Dave. We didn't see this coming. We knew she was struggling, but we never thought it would end like this." I stood there, the phone pressed to my ear, unable to comprehend what I was hearing. Debbie was gone? It didn't seem real. How could she be gone? The next few days passed in a haze. I attended the funeral, but I felt like I was walking through a nightmare. Seeing Debbie's parents, their faces etched with grief, broke something inside me. I wanted to comfort them, but I didn't know how. I was just as lost as they were. As I stood by her grave, watching as they lowered her casket into the ground, I felt a deep, overwhelming sadness. Debbie had made mistakes, but she didn't deserve this. No one did. After the funeral, I returned home, but the house felt emptier than ever. The renovations were nearly complete, but they brought me no joy. Everything I had built was supposed to be for a future that no longer existed. In the months that followed, I tried to move on. I focused on work, on maintaining the house, on anything that would keep me from dwelling on the past. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had failed. Failed to protect Debbie, failed to see the signs, failed to be there when she needed me most. Eventually, I realized that I couldn't stay in the house any longer. It was filled with too many memories, too much pain. So I sold it, packed up my things, and left town, hoping that a fresh start would help me find some measure of peace. But as I drove away from the place that had once been my home, I couldn't help but feel that I was leaving behind more than just a house. I was leaving behind a part of myself, a part that I would never get back. And in the end, I knew that no matter where I went, the shadows of the past would follow me. The ghosts of what could have been, of what was lost, would always be with me, haunting the edges of my mind, reminding me of a time when everything seemed possible, and when I believed that love could conquer all. But life, as I had learned the hard way, was not so simple. It was filled with twists and turns, with heartbreak and betrayal, with choices that could never be undone. And no matter how hard I tried, I could never escape the truth that sometimes love just wasn't enough. And that, perhaps, was the hardest lesson of all.